All right, YouTube, what is up? Good morning, good morning. Welcome back to the channel. Welcome back to another training video. Emphasis on good morning. Right now, it's about 4:45 in the morning. I went to bed early last night. Kind of woke up a little earlier this morning. I'm usually not up this early, but we're up and at it. And I've kind of learned over the years that if I have a night where I can't really sleep very well, it's usually best to just get up and get the day started. And we're going to get the day started today with a super early morning training session. I've already had a little bit less than a liter of fluid between just regular plain water, and then I've had about 12 ounces of coffee, and I'm supersetting that coffee with a energy drink. This is the Ghost Swedish Fish. I haven't had this flavor in a long time. This is one of my favorite flavors, but that's going to be the pre-workout formula for today. And then on the way to the gym, I will be drinking what is normally my intra workout of EAAs and carbs and everything. I'll kind of be getting that in me before I get to the gym. Today is going to be a training commentary. I'll be very honest with you guys. I don't know what topic we're going to talk about when we get into the training section. I need to pick one from my marker board over there and decide what we're going to talk about, but probably won't do too much talking about the session. Real quick, before we get into today's training session, I just kind of want to talk about what it is that you guys are going to watch, and then some, I guess, context behind this session. Today is full body B as in boy. This is my pendulum squat, hyperextension, focused full body day. Obviously, I do way more than that, but I would definitely say that the two major movements that we're going to do today are the pendulum and the hyperextension. Speaking of the hyperextension, there are going to be two new modifications to today's training session, starting with the hyperextension. So the hyperextension that I've been using is a plate-loaded cable machine, and at this point I have been able to do the full stack and extra added weight. I'll try and overlay the clip here as I'm talking, but this particular hyperextension machine is made by Booty Builder, and the Booty Builder machines have some pegs on the outside of the casing of the machine, and what those pegs are meant for is to put resistance bands around those, so that as you come closer to the top and the lockout, the tension is kicking on and we're recruiting the glutes more. At this point, I have been adding weight plates onto the band pegs, and I'm kind of at the point where I'm doing like a full plate on each side, and I'm genuinely kind of worried about adding more weight onto the machine so that those weight pegs don't break. So as you can see, I have purchased some mini bands, and I will be using these mini bands today, which will obviously, hopefully, allow me to use less weight added onto the machine and kind of reset my progression with that. I'm not sure if these bands are going to be too heavy or not heavy enough. I bought these off of Amazon, Sirius Steel. Shout out to them. I get nothing from this, but I just bought these off of Amazon. And then we'll see how it goes today. These bands may be perfect amounts of tension. They may be too heavy. They may be too light. But obviously, the only way to find out is to do it and see what happens. And then I am going to lose my gym pin virginity today. Very similar to the Booty Builder. Speaking of the Booty Builder, by the way, I actually think that this will also work on the Booty Builder. So that is also an option instead of the bands if the bands don't work. But the adductor machine, I'll also try and maybe overlay a clip or a picture here, has really kind of gotten out of control. And my gym has a lot of 5-pound blocks and magnet plates and everything. But even with adding all of that stuff on, I'm really kind of getting to a point where the adductor is getting a little ridiculous. So I bought a gym pin. This is an off-brand one. It's not an actual gym pin, but it is still a gym pin nevertheless. and I will be using this for the first time on the adductor today. This will be the first time that I have used a gym pin on any exercise, let alone the adductor, but first time in my life that I'll be using a gym pin today. So the gym pin on the adductor and the bands on the hyperextension, these are going to be some new additions to today's workout, but other than that, everything is going to be fairly normal. We've got 14 movements, one set each, and we're just going to get in the gym and we're going to start banging this one out. All right, we're back in the gym. Well, I guess we're back in the gym on video and back in the office, back at home. This ended up being a really, really good workout. Really happy with all of my numbers, really happy with the way that everything felt, especially because this more or less is what I'm considering to be my first training session of prep. So up until this point, I have kind of been dieting with the thought of a prep maybe happening kind of more in the background of a thought, but after taking a look at next year's show schedule and having a conversation with some people in my corner, a couple people from the gym and my girlfriend, you know, it's kind of looking like there's going to be a show in the future within this next year. So because of that, there's been a little bit of a mentality switch with the training, and as I kind of mentioned, this is kind of the first workout that I'm considering of this year's contest prep. Now, you know, I don't want to get too much into this on this particular video. I'll probably talk about that in the cut update that I make sometime soon, but I have kind of levels of prep in terms of how strictly I'm going to be adhering to things, and I'll highlight that a little bit more once we get into the cut update video, but I am kind of making more of that shift towards prep. And because of that, I thought that today's topic would be a fun one to discuss 5 problems or 5 issues that I had in my first prep, or maybe 5 mistakes that I made in my first prep that I'm going to be mindful of trying not to make again as we get into this next one. Now, I was self-coached for my first prep, and I am planning on continuing to be self-coached into my second prep here for a multitude of reasons. One, I get a lot of enjoyment out of it. I really do like being in the driver's seat, and I really do like making my own decisions, even though it can be difficult at times. I really do like that. And at the end of the day, as much as I want to be a strong, competitive bodybuilder, I guess more focused on being a good coach. If I had to make a choice between being a really good coach and maybe an average competitive bodybuilder, or being a good competitive bodybuilder and an average coach, I would prefer to be a better coach. When I kind of think of my long-term plan in this sport, for lack of a better word, coaching is really where my priorities are. Now, I do think that me being as good of a competitive bodybuilder as I can be is a foundational part of building that coaching reputation, for lack of a better word. And so I do think that self-coaching makes me a better coach for my clients. Now, I do have a couple people that I communicate with at my gym who I run opinions and questions by, and their opinion does really matter to me. These individuals both happen to be in their 50s or 60s and have been competing and bodybuilding for 30 to 40 years. So their experience is really invaluable to me. But at the end of the day, it's coming down to me to make the decision. And one of the great things about getting started in this most recent prep here is that it's kind of given me an opportunity to reflect on the previous prep and kind of take notes and make a list of some of the mistakes that I made so that we don't make those again. Now, I have these things listed off 1 through 5, but these aren't really in any particular order. I think at the end of the day, all of these mistakes can be held in equal kind of equal ground. I don't think there's one mistake that's necessarily worse making than the other one, but it is still worth mentioning that these aren't in any particular order. So just kind of jumping right into number one, I started the first prep way too fat. If anything, I kind of gained some traction on social media in my off season for as thick as I was getting, and to be honest, it was well deserved. This is kind of a different conversation for a different day, but in hindsight, obviously, I had overdone my off season leading into this first show. Now, I'm glad that I overdid it instead of underdid it, but nevertheless, I did overdo it. And because I started too fat, the prep needed to be longer than what it should have been, and I needed to lose more weight than what I realistically would have liked to lose. And it just made the overall process of the prep not only harder and more fatiguing, but it also made it a little bit less enjoyable. There came to be a certain point by the end of the prep where I was kind of just looking forward to the prep being over because I was so tired and so fatigued and mentally kind of burned out from how long I had been prepping, that I was really just excited for the show to get here and get done and over with so that I could kind of get back with my normal life. And at the end of the day, that really is something that I kind of regret from the first prep. From the time that I decided that I wanted to do my first show until the time that I actually did do my first show, that was about a 6-year period. So I trained and dieted very meticulously for 5 to 6 years before I finally, I guess you could say, gain the courage to actually commit to doing a show. And as much of an enjoyable experience as it was, I think that it definitely could have been a little bit more enjoyable if I just didn't make it unnecessarily hard on myself. So the starting point is definitely something that needed to be taken into consideration this year. If I haven't kind of discussed this by now in the cut update video, or I have it overlaying right now, I have a current physique update that's kind of playing, and I'm definitely in a much leaner starting point this time around than what I was the first time. So the future is bright in that sense, and I had a really well thought out, meticulous off season that was leading into this show. So that obviously is an important piece of the puzzle as I kind of set myself up to be in a better position from the get-go, but just kind of carrying that momentum as we get into the second show, I think, is really going to pay off. And I can honestly say from where I'm speaking at this point in the prep, I'm really happy with the starting point in terms of my body weight cap. So I am planning on competing in the middleweight division again in open bodybuilding, which has a maximum weight of 176 pounds. And as of the day that I'm filming this video, I'm weighing in at about 194 pounds. So I'm only 18 pounds away from the weight cap, and I expect that by the time I get fully in shape, I'm obviously going to be well and more, have lost well and more weight than 18 pounds. So I actually had a mistake. This is not one of the mistakes that I had intended to go over on this video, but I made a mistake last year, or in my first show, where I actually weighed in at exactly 176 pounds. I woke up on the morning of registration, and I was 3 to 4 pounds below the weight cap, and I just completely spaced the fact that my body weight would increase as I got further throughout the day. So by the time that I registered that afternoon, I had eaten a couple meals, I had drank some water, and I actually ended up weighing in right on the weight cap. Fortunately, I was able to take my sweatshirt off and re-weigh so that I could actually get into the middleweight weight class. But that just caused an unnecessary amount of stress purely from poor planning on my end. So to know that I have a better set point and a better starting point is hopefully, potentially going to alleviate that stress of having to make weight, and I should be able to make the weight cap considerably easier this time around. The second mistake that I made, that I don't plan on making again, is choosing my carbohydrate sources particularly for my refeeds and my carb up, based off of my hunger and my appetite, and not based off of what is actually going to give me the best results. So what do I mean by this? Obviously, as we get towards the end of the show, and particularly where I was with my first year, very, very, very hungry. Food focus is pretty high, and that also kind of lines up with an opportunity to mess up the refeeds and the carb ups, which is exactly what I did. As I was increasing the carbs that I was eating on those days, I was choosing my carb sources based off of what I thought would fill me up and kind of satisfy my hunger levels, instead of what would have brought me a better look. So let's say that a regular day I was eating 300 grams of carbs, and then when I would do a refeed, I was refeeding on 600 grams of carbs. So I would add 300 grams of carbs to my base diet. I was getting a lot of those added 300 grams of carbs from oatmeal, rice cakes, maybe more potato, because those foods were a little bit more voluminous, maybe had a little bit more fiber in there. And part of the reason why I was really looking forward to the refeeds was because it was kind of a temporary solution to the hunger. What I should have done instead is, when I added in those carbohydrates, I should have added all of those in from white rice. The whole reason why the carbohydrates were getting added in the first place was to help with training performance and to help with glycogen storages, which would help the look. But obviously, if those carbohydrates are bringing a stomach distress, extra fiber, maybe some water retention that comes with that, not only does it make the look even worse, but it also makes training uncomfortable in the days to follow. And I can kind of think of a couple times where I was having a huge meal of oats and rice cakes as my last meal before bed, and literally laying in bed having a hard time falling asleep because I had this huge distended gut. And I was purely making the decision. You're obviously asking yourself, why would you choose to eat those foods? As I'm explaining that, it obviously sounds like a rookie mistake, but I was so hungry that the emotions of the hunger were driving me to choose my carb sources off of what would satisfy the hunger and not off of what would actually bring me the best look. And when I take a look at where my physique was before I kind of started the carb up process versus after the carb up process was done, I was definitely more full after the carb up was done, but I was definitely way more watery. And I think a huge component of that comes down to the carb sources that I chose. So what I'm going to be doing this year going forward is, when I need to make a carb increase, I'm going to make all of those carbs come from white rice. So let's say I'm having 400 grams of carbs in a day and I decide to add an extra 300. I'm literally just going to look up how much rice I need to get 300 grams of carbs. I'm going to cook that and I'm going to spread that across 5 meals. I am going to have a certain base level of potato and oatmeal and bread and stuff like that that's going to be in my diet, but when it comes to increasing carbohydrates for the sake of filling out the physique, I'm going to do those 100% exclusively from white rice, just because that's going to give me the best bang for my buck in terms of how easy it's going to be to make and eat. It's going to store the least amount of water on me. It's going to bloat my stomach the least amount, so it's just going to be white rice only as we go forward. Third mistake that I made was not practicing my routine. And when it actually comes to my placing, this didn't affect my placing at all. This is purely just like a mental thing, that like a regret that I have. As of the time of me filming this video in the NPC, the posing routines are not being actively judged and factored into your score. So your placing is being solely based off of prejudging in the morning. And so unfortunately, this creates a mentality with a lot of bodybuilders, myself included, that the posing routine is essentially meaningless. And so with a lot of first timers, and with myself included, obviously I'm calling myself out with this, I spent all of my time practicing the prejudging mandatory and compensatory poses, because that's what's going to be judged. And I really did not care about my routine at all. And there were a decent amount of people, a handful of people at the show that put very serious thought into their posing routines, and they were really awesome to watch, and they got a great response from the crowd. So I really want to spend more time to work on the posing routine this year for nothing more purely than pride. I want to be able to not go up there and look like I just was winging it, because that's literally what I did. I just went up there, I played a song for a minute, I did some random poses. It was just honestly terrible. At the time, I didn't care about it, but as time has gone on, I'm kind of embarrassed about it. So that's going to be something that I'm going to be working on for sure as we get into year number 2. The fourth mistake that I made is another one that I'm kind of embarrassed to make, but I basically did pump style training the last week and a half as we led into the show. And I think a lot of this stems from the fact of how fatigued I was. As I kind of mentioned, by the end of the show, I was so tired, my body was so exhausted from unnecessarily long and unnecessarily aggressive prep, that by the time I got to the last couple of weeks, I was really justifying easing off the gas, particularly in the gym. And I kind of eased up on my training frequency, and instead of sticking with push-pull legs type of setup, which is what I had used throughout the entire prep, I kind of switched into more of a body part split for 1 week, and then from there I just kind of rotated back and forth between doing upper and lower body kind of pump style days. And I'm really just not happy with the way that resulted in the look. And as you can imagine, just going to be focusing on training hard and heavy for as long as I can up until the end of the prep. Obviously, there's going to be a certain point where I'm going to have to maybe leave a rep or two in the tank, or, drop the volume down a little bit from there. But I think I just did that way too much before I kind of got into the show. A lot of the decisions that I made were based off of how tired and how fatigued I was. And obviously the reason why I was so tired and fatigued all stems back from starting too fat and needing to do too hard and too aggressive of a prep. So this is one of those things where if you have a really tough starting point, it makes everything that follows quite difficult, and you'll very often find that one mistake kind of leads into another. And then the final mistake that I made, and if anything, this may be the most important one, is that I don't feel like I really enjoyed the process as much as I could have or should have as I was going through it. Again, I was so tired and so fatigued by the end that I was at certain points of the prep kind of throwing a pity party for myself and feeling sorry for myself and being tired and hungry and being in a grumpy mood. And I just know that affected a lot of the people around me, not only my girlfriend, but my parents and my relationship with my sister and people at the gym that I talked to. It really just kind of got me in a spot that I didn't want to be in, and I hope that I don't get in again. And when the show is over, you can kind of take a step back and you can take a breather and you can realize how awesome the process was. But I want to be able to kind of enjoy that a little bit more as I'm actively going through the prep. And I do think that there's, a certain point where, you need to keep moving forward and you can't spend too much time thinking about how good things are going. But I don't think that means that you don't focus on celebrating the good things at all and kind of enjoying the process a little bit more. And obviously now that I've gone through that process myself and I've gone through it with a lot of clients in the meantime, I think it's going to be a little easier for me to do that. I hope that you guys liked this video. I'm hoping that maybe there's at least one person who's watching this video today who's kind of getting for their first show and can, maybe get a little heads up from someone who's competed at least once and has coached a decent amount of people to compete in the meantime. We're all going to make mistakes, but I think that's one of the things that makes this so beautiful. It's very rare you're only going to do one show. If you really love bodybuilding, this is going to be something that you're going to do for a while. So that's kind of the best part about doing it, is making mistakes and then learning from those so that you can get better. And that kind of gives you a lot to be excited about for the future. So thanks a lot for watching, guys. As always, if you've got any questions, go ahead and leave those in the comments. If you're training today, then train hard. If you're resting, then rest hard. And as always, take care of yourselves.